A suspended police officer was hiding from the world in a snow-buried cabin when his retired K9 suddenly began howling at the storm. Minutes later, through the blinding white, he found a 7-year-old girl dragging a sled, and on it, a baby barely breathing. She whispered, "Mama said Officer Ryan would find us." But he had never met them before. Her mother was missing, her home burned down, and the man hunting them was the same one who destroyed his career. What unfolded that night would test every ounce of courage, loyalty, and love, and prove that miracles sometimes arrive on 4 paws. What happened next will make you cry, and believe in second chances again. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The wind screamed through the mountains of Silver Ridge, Colorado, hurling snow like shards of glass against the pine trees. The storm had swallowed the valley whole. Power lines had fallen, and the sky itself seemed frozen solid. Only one cabin still held light, a flicker of orange warmth struggling against an ocean of white. Inside sat Officer Ryan Cole, 38 years old, broad-shouldered but tired, his face carved with the kind of lines that come from both cold and regret. Once a decorated police officer, he had been suspended for a case he couldn't let go, a corruption network that had reached too close to power. They called him obsessed, unstable. The badge now lay in a drawer next to a bottle of whiskey he'd sworn never to open again. But tonight, the storm and the silence made promises hard to keep. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the flames devour the wood. The light danced over his rough jaw and the small scar that crossed his eyebrow. A scar from the night his partner was killed, a night that never left him. He took another sip of whiskey, the burn sharp, his thoughts dull. Beside the fireplace lay Shadow, his old K9 partner. A German shepherd, black and tan, 9 years old. Once the sharpest nose in the unit, now slightly limping from an old bullet wound. His coat still gleamed thick and healthy, his amber eyes intelligent and alive. Shadow wasn't a pet. He was a soldier retired against his will. Like Ryan, he lived in the borderland between purpose and survival. The cabin creaked as the wind punched against its walls. Outside, the world howled, but inside, all was heavy stillness, until Shadow lifted his head. A low, guttural growl came first. Then a sound Ryan hadn't heard in years, a deep, drawn-out howl, long and trembling that cut through the noise of the storm. It wasn't random, it wasn't fear, it was a call. Ryan turned, frowning. Shadow. "Hey, easy," he said softly, but the dog's body had stiffened, ears forward, nose twitching toward the back window. Ryan followed his gaze. Beyond the glass, nothing but a blur of white. Still, Shadow began pacing, nails scratching the wood floor. He barked once, short, percussive, a sound designed to alert his partner. Ryan's instinct woke up faster than his mind. He grabbed his flashlight, shrugged into his parka, and reached for the heavy-duty boots by the door. The whiskey's fog evaporated instantly. Training took over. The door burst open the moment he unlatched it, a blast of wind slamming into his face, stinging his eyes. "Stay close," he shouted over the roar. Shadow didn't hesitate. He plunged into the blizzard, a dark streak swallowed by the storm. The snow was waist-deep in places, each step like dragging through cement. Ryan followed the sound. One bark, then another. The flashlight beam was a joke, barely piercing 5 feet of swirling chaos. But the dog's voice guided him like a compass. "Shadow! Track!" The German shepherd's silhouette moved ahead, purposeful, his tail stiff, his nose cutting through wind and snow. Then, suddenly, a change in tone. A whine, urgent. Ryan stumbled forward, branches slapping against his coat. The beam of light hit something red, a sled, small, plastic, half buried, and beside it a tiny form. His breath stopped. A girl, maybe 7 years old, knelt in the snow. Her light brown hair was matted with frost, her cheeks raw and blue. She wore a thin gray winter coat over a red sweater, soaked, torn at one sleeve. Her arms were wrapped around something bundled in a beige blanket. Ryan dropped to his knees beside her. Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her lips trembled. He's cold," she whispered, her voice barely a thread. Ryan pulled back the blanket and saw a baby. Pale, lips nearly blue, maybe 1 year old. Eyes closed, chest rising in shallow gasps. Oh my God. He stripped off one glove, pressing his fingers to the baby's neck. There. A pulse, weak, but there. He looked back at the girl. "You did good, honey. You kept him warm. What's your name?" "Mila," she said, her small teeth chattering violently. "My brother's Eli." Her hands were frozen stiff, but in one she clutched something. A small USB drive smeared with dried blood. She wouldn't let go. Ryan tried to pry it loose gently. "Mila, we have to get you both out of here, okay? You're safe now." But the girl shook her head, panic flashing in her frostbitten eyes. "Mama said the man in the cabin would help us. She said Officer Ryan will find us." Ryan froze. He hadn't told her his name. For a heartbeat, the wind itself seemed to stop. Then Shadow barked sharply, circling them, his breath fogging in the frigid air. The sound snapped Ryan back to motion. He scooped up the baby, tucking him inside his jacket against his chest, the body limp but faintly warm. With his other arm, he lifted Mila onto her feet. "Come on, kid. Stay close to me. Shadow. Home." The dog took the lead, bounding through the snow, tail cutting a dark line in the storm. Ryan followed the moving shape, his legs burning, the weight of the two children pressing into him like destiny itself. Halfway to the cabin, Mila stirred, whispering through trembling lips. "Mama said, don't let him find us." "Who?" Ryan shouted over the gale. "Who's after you?" But her head had dropped against his shoulder, exhaustion claiming her. By the time they reached the cabin, Ryan's arms were numb. He kicked the door shut with his heel, locking the world of white outside. The silence hit like a punch. Just the sound of his breath and the hiss of fire. He laid the baby on a bearskin rug near the hearth and stripped off his soaked gloves. Shadow circled once, lying down beside the children, his thick coat brushing against Mila's frozen legs. The dog's body heat began to seep into her immediately. Ryan pulled blankets from the cot, wrapping the baby tighter, rubbing his tiny hands to coax blood back into them. He moved on to Mila, peeling off her wet outer coat. Beneath it, her red sweater was stiff with ice. Her lips had turned white. "Stay with me, Mila," he urged, wrapping her in a wool blanket. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment. "Mama said you'd know what to do." Ryan stared at her, confusion mixing with dread. "Your mom? Who is she?" But Mila didn't answer. Her body went slack, the exhaustion too much. Shadow pressed closer, lying across her legs like a living heater, his head resting protectively over her lap. Ryan reached for his first aid kit, working methodically, checking pulse, warming compresses, keeping his hands moving even as his mind reeled. Who were these children? How did they know his name? When he reached to adjust the blanket, the small USB drive slipped from Mila's frozen hand, landing on the rug beside the firelight. It glinted. Blood and metal. Ryan stared at it, unease crawling up his spine. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching toward the window again, letting out a low growl. "Easy," Ryan murmured, but his own gut twisted. He stepped to the window, peering out into the black and white void. Nothing, no light, no movement, but instinct told him the storm wasn't the only thing out there. He turned back to the children. The firelight painted their faces in gold and shadow. Two fragile sparks that had somehow survived the coldest night of the year. He sank to his knees beside them, hand resting on Shadow's head. "Good boy," he whispered. "You did good." Outside, the storm roared on. Inside, the cabin held its fragile warmth, a small world where fate, guilt, and survival had collided, and in the center of it all the tiny USB drive glimmered faintly, as if it carried the heartbeat of everything yet to come. The wind outside had softened into a dull moan, but the storm hadn't really passed. It was only catching its breath. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Ryan sat near it, his back against the wall, the two children asleep under heavy blankets. The baby's breathing was steadier now, his cheeks no longer gray but faintly pink. The girl, Mila, twitched occasionally, murmuring fragments of dreams only children in shock could have. Shadow lay beside her, his great body curved protectively around both children, his chest rising and falling with slow, watchful patience. Ryan hadn't slept. His eyes were on the small object glinting beside the firelight, the blood-stained USB drive that had fallen from Mila's hand. Every time he looked at it, 100 old instincts itched awake. Evidence, secrets, corruption. All words he thought he'd buried with his badge. But the way the girl had whispered his name. Mama said Officer Ryan would find us. That sentence looped through his mind like static. He reached for the USB, turning it between his fingers. The dried blood made his gut twist. Someone had bled for whatever was on it. He glanced at the laptop sitting on his small wooden desk. The storm had killed the internet hours ago, but the computer still had battery power. Ryan hesitated, then plugged the drive in. The screen blinked, flickered once, and loaded a single folder named Charity Records, Grant Foundation. He froze. Harold Grant. The name alone brought bile to his throat. Grant, the lawyer who smiled for cameras, who owned half the town's real estate, who'd publicly accused Ryan of tampering with evidence in a case 3 years ago. That accusation had cost him his badge, his partner, his life. And now, this drive had his name written on it. He opened the folder. Thousands of files filled the screen. Ledgers, scanned bank statements, legal documents, even photos. One by one, they told a story of theft hidden behind a mask of charity. Millions funneled through a fund meant for orphans, diverted into offshore accounts under Grant's control. The children those funds were meant to protect had lost homes, families, and futures, while the lawyer built mansions and campaigns. Ryan's throat went dry. Jesus, he whispered under his breath. The realization hit like a slow, crushing weight. This was enough to destroy Grant, to expose everything, and whoever had brought this drive out of hiding had paid a terrible price. He turned to the children. Mila was awake now, staring at him from under the blanket. Her eyes were red, swollen, too old for her face. "Hey," Ryan said softly, closing the laptop lid halfway. "You're safe here. You did a brave thing bringing that out." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the flickering shadows. "He killed her." Ryan leaned forward. "Who? Mila?" "The man from the big house. He came after Mama. She told me to run. She gave me that thing and said, 'Find Officer Ryan. He'll help.'" Her voice cracked, raw and fragile. "I hid with Eli in the woods. I saw his lights. He pushed her down the hill. Then the fire started." Her last words trembled into silence. Ryan sat frozen. He didn't need details to fill in the rest. He'd seen that kind of brutality before. He rubbed his face, exhaling through clenched teeth. "Your mom, what was her name?" "Sarah," Mila whispered. "Sarah Clark." The name landed like a gunshot in Ryan's mind. Dr. Emma Clark's younger sister. Emma, the local veterinarian who had treated Shadow after his last injury, one of the few people who had believed Ryan when everyone else turned their back. He'd heard Sarah's name once in passing, a woman who'd moved north, married young, then vanished from town records years ago. Ryan looked toward the radio on the shelf. It was an old shortwave transceiver, mostly used by rescue patrols. He turned it on, twisting the dial through static. "Come on, come on." The signal crackled weakly under the interference of the storm. He pressed the mic button. Emma Clark, if you can hear this, it's Ryan Cole. I have the children, Sarah's kids. They're alive. Repeat, they're alive. Static hissed. No answer. He tried again, adjusting frequency. The second time, a faint voice broke through, soft, distorted, but recognizable. Ryan, you said, children? He leaned in. Yes, Sarah's children. They're here. They're safe for now, but someone's coming. I need help. There's a man, Harold Grant. Do you copy? Grant. Then silence. The line went dead, lost to the storm. But somewhere across the frozen valley, in a small clinic lit by emergency lamps, Dr. Emma Clark dropped the radio handset, her face pale. She was in her early 40s, tall, thin, her blonde hair tied loosely under a wool cap. The years had left fine lines around her eyes, not from vanity or age, but from sleepless nights tending to animals and regrets. She was known in town as kind but fiercely private. Her husband, a firefighter, had died in a rescue accident 5 winters ago, leaving her half alive inside. Now she stood frozen for a heartbeat before moving with sudden purpose. She grabbed her parka and goggles, ran out to the shed, and kicked the ignition on her snowmobile. "Hang on, Ryan," she muttered. "I'm coming." The machine roared to life, carving its way into the storm like a silver bullet. Back in the cabin, Ryan was pacing. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadow moved from window to window, nose twitching, growling low each time the wind shifted. Then, for an instant, light flashed through the trees. Not lightning, not natural. Headlights. Ryan killed the firelight with a swift motion, plunging the cabin into darkness except for the faint glow of embers. The children stirred. "It's okay," he whispered. "Stay quiet." Shadow's tail stiffened. He crouched by the door, hackles raised, ready. The headlights grew brighter. A snowmobile, maybe 2, cutting through the storm toward the cabin. Ryan grabbed his service pistol from the drawer, checked the magazine, and took position near the window. Through the frost, he could make out the faint beam of light weaving closer, bouncing off trees. His pulse quickened. "Not yet," he murmured to Shadow. "Wait." The beams stopped just outside the clearing. Then silence. The only sound was the faint hum of an idling engine. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They were looking for something. Or someone. Ryan kept his breath low. Mila clutched her brother tighter, whispering, "He's here." A chill not from the weather crawled up Ryan's spine. He whispered to Shadow, "Guard them." Then he slid toward the window, eyes narrow, straining to see through the curtain of snow. A figure stepped off the snowmobile, tall, wearing a long dark coat and a headlamp that cut sharp streaks through the storm. The beam swept slowly across the tree line toward the cabin. Ryan didn't wait. He flicked off the laptop, stuffed the USB into his pocket, and motioned to Mila. "Stay low. Don't move until I say." Shadow gave a low, rumbling growl, body trembling with restraint. Outside, the man with the headlamp took another step, then another. The light flashed directly across the window, bright enough for Ryan to see the reflection of his own face in the glass, and beyond it, a shadowed figure pointing something. Binoculars? No. A gun. He ducked instinctively as a muffled pop cracked through the night. The bullet shattered part of the window, spraying glass onto the floor. Mila screamed before Ryan's hand covered her mouth. "Quiet!" Shadow barked once, deep and booming. The sound echoed through the trees, swallowed by the storm. Ryan pulled Mila and the baby behind the table, keeping them low. His eyes darted to the back door. Their only chance if this turned into a siege. Another light appeared in the distance, cutting across the forest. This one moved faster, steadier. A second snowmobile. Ryan's heart pounded. If that was Grant's men, they were boxed in. But if it was Emma? He waited. Shadow's ears flicked toward the sound. Then a new noise, faint but distinct, the whine of a smaller engine, closer than the others. Ryan risked a glance through the broken glass. A slim figure in white gear had arrived from the west trail. Emma. Her headlamp flashed once, twice, a signal. Relief hit him like oxygen. He tapped Shadow's shoulder. "Good boy. Stay ready." Outside, Emma jumped off her snowmobile, pulling a medical pack from the back. She ducked low, sliding across the snow toward the cabin entrance. Her voice barely carried over the storm. "Ryan! It's me!" Ryan opened the door, grabbed her by the arm, and pulled her in. For a moment, their eyes met, exhaustion and recognition shared between two people who had already lost too much. "They're Sarah's kids?" Emma asked breathlessly. "Yes," Ryan said, "and Grant's coming for them." Emma turned pale, but there was steel in her tone. "Then we make sure he doesn't get them." Outside, the headlights in the distance flared again, closer this time, cutting through the dark. The storm was far from over. The wind howled like a wounded creature outside, slamming against the wooden walls of the cabin. Snow hissed through the cracks under the door, whispering like ghosts. Inside, the air was dense with tension and smoke. Ryan stood near the window, pistol raised, eyes locked on the vague figures emerging from the white storm. Behind him, Emma cradled the infant on a makeshift cot, fitting a small oxygen mask over his face. The faint hiss of air was the only calm sound in a world gone mad. Mila crouched under the table, clutching the hem of her brother's blanket, her small face streaked with tears and soot. Shadow stood between her and the door, his chest low, a low growl thrumming through his ribcage like a drumbeat of warning. Then came the knock. Polite, deliberate, as if someone wanted to pretend this was all civilized. Ryan froze. A man's voice called through the wood, muffled but calm. "Detective Cole, it's Harold Grant. I know what you found." The name sliced through the air like a blade. Ryan's grip on his gun tightened. Emma's eyes widened, her face pale. She mouthed silently, "He's here." Grant's voice carried a confidence that didn't match the storm. "You have something of mine. I'm here for the children, and we both know how this ends if you make the wrong choice." Ryan moved closer to the door, his tone cold. "You show your face here after killing their mother?" A low chuckle answered. "You should be thanking me, Ryan. That woman was a liability, and now you're harboring her spawn. Step aside, and I'll make sure you don't end up the same way she did." Ryan's jaw flexed. His finger brushed the trigger guard. Behind him, Emma whispered, "He's armed." She could see the faint silhouette through the frost. 3 shapes, not one. Grant was in his early 50s, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair slicked back in a lawyer's perfect arrogance. Even in the storm, his clothes were immaculate. A black wool coat, a silk scarf, gloves of fine leather. His face was carved with confidence, the kind that came from years of manipulating others and getting away with it. His eyes, pale blue and hollow, had the coldness of a man who'd learned to mimic empathy, not feel it. The 2 men behind him were nothing like him. One was huge, a hulking brute in a brown parka, his beard stiff with frost, his gloved hands gripping a shotgun. The other was lean, nervous, with sunken eyes and a twitch that betrayed his trigger-happy nature. Grant's voice carried over the wind again. "I'm coming in. You've got one chance to do this quietly." Ryan shouted back, "You set one foot in here and I swear." The rest was swallowed by sound. The door slammed open under a single-booted kick. Snow exploded inward. Grant entered first, brushing snow from his coat, smiling like a man arriving at a dinner party instead of a standoff. The 2 gunmen flanked him, weapons raised. Mila screamed and clamped a hand over her mouth. Emma instinctively shielded the baby with her body, crouching low. Shadow growled, lips curling back, a line of foam glistening in the firelight. Grant held up a gloved hand, his tone syrupy smooth. "Easy, detective. Let's be reasonable. I know you're angry, but these children are mine now. Legally. Their mother signed guardianship papers before her unfortunate accident." Ryan stepped forward slowly, gun lowered but steady. His voice was ice. "You forged those papers. I've got the evidence." Grant's smile faltered for the briefest second. "You have nothing admissible. You think a USB will stand against my lawyers? You're out of your league, Cole." Then his tone darkened, voice almost tender. "You've been in exile too long, Detective. You don't understand how power works anymore. But I do." That's when Ryan saw it, the faint glint of metal under Grant's coat, a suppressor attached to a sleek handgun. Grant's fingers twitched toward it as he took another step. "Drop it," Ryan barked. The silence that followed was shattered by Shadow's sudden lunge. The German Shepherd launched forward with a roar, muscles exploding under his thick coat. He hit the smaller gunman first, dragging him down in a blur of teeth and motion. The man screamed, the shotgun firing into the ceiling. Wood splintered. Grant staggered back, firing instinctively. The sound was muted but deadly. A bullet tore through the air, and Shadow yelped. Ryan fired back twice, forcing Grant behind the table. The big brute raised his weapon, but Ryan flipped the dining table over, using it as a shield as more gunfire ripped through the cabin. Emma crawled toward the fireplace, clutching the baby and the oxygen tank. "Ryan," she shouted, "he's bleeding." "I know." Ryan ducked, returning fire. "Keep low." Shadow, despite the graze on his shoulder, dragged himself toward Mila, planting his body between her and the chaos. His fur was streaked with blood, but his eyes were fierce, unwavering. The little girl pressed her face into his neck, trembling, her tiny fingers gripping his collar. Grant crouched near the overturned chair, shouting to his men, "Take the woman! Get the kids!" Emma, realizing she was cornered, reached for her med bag. Her gloved hand found the long metal syringe filled with tranquilizer, the kind used for panicked animals. Her heart pounded as she drew it, the steel glinting in the firelight. The smaller gunman staggered up from the floor, clutching his torn arm, aiming at her. Before he could shoot, she jabbed the syringe into his thigh and slammed the plunger. He screamed and collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Ryan fired again, one bullet catching the bigger man's shoulder. The brute fell back with a grunt, crashing into a cabinet. The cabin filled with the smell of gunpowder and burning wood as one of the oil lamps shattered, flames licking at the floorboards. Grant ducked behind the doorframe, reloading with calm precision, his smile returning. "You can't save them all, Cole," he called. "You'll run out of bullets before I run out of men." Ryan clenched his jaw. "Maybe, but I don't need all my bullets for you." He looked toward the window and saw a blur of motion. Headlights. Emma's snowmobile. Grant caught it too. His smirk twisted. "Ah, the doctor. Perfect timing." The door burst open again, this time from behind. Emma appeared, breath ragged, snow clinging to her hair and coat. She didn't hesitate. She lifted the small tranquilizer pistol from her belt and fired. The dart hit the big man square in the neck. He groaned once, then dropped. Grant turned his weapon on her, firing a shot that whistled past her face. Ryan seized the moment, tackling him hard. The gun went off again, grazing Ryan's shoulder. They slammed into the wall, the USB flying from Ryan's pocket and skidding across the floor. Grant reached for it. Emma saw it too. In one motion, she grabbed her veterinary kit and popped open the lid. Inside were rows of medicine vials. She slipped the USB into an empty bottle of antibiotics and sealed it shut. She shoved it deep into the pack just as Grant elbowed Ryan in the ribs and threw him aside. The room was chaos. Smoke, fire, screaming wind. Mila crawled from behind the furniture, clutching her baby brother as Shadow limped toward her, pressing against her side. Ryan staggered up, one hand on his bleeding arm. Grant raised his gun, leveling it at the children. "You should have stayed out of this, Cole." But before he could fire, Shadow lunged again, knocking his arm aside. The gun went off, the bullet embedding in the wall beside Mila's head. Ryan dove forward, slamming Grant into the floor. The two men struggled, rolling across the burning rug. A single punch from Ryan cracked across Grant's jaw, but the older man retaliated, grabbing for his weapon again. A sudden hiss broke the fight. Emma had grabbed a CO2 extinguisher from beside the stove and blasted it toward the spreading fire. The white fog engulfed the room. Grant coughed, blinded. Ryan surged forward, slamming his elbow down. The gun clattered to the floor. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The baby's weak cry, the dying fire, the sound of Shadow's heavy breathing. Grant lay pinned, glaring up with blood on his teeth. Ryan's voice was a whisper. "You're done." Grant smirked even as Ryan's handcuffs clicked shut on his wrists. "You think you've won. You haven't even begun to understand." But Ryan wasn't listening. He turned toward Emma. "Get the kids out." She nodded, wrapping her coat around Mila and Eli. Shadow limped after them, blood trailing on the wooden floor. As Emma opened the door, the storm swallowed her silhouette, snow swirling around like smoke. Ryan looked down at Grant one last time. The man was still smiling. Outside, the blizzard screamed again. The storm wasn't just around the cabin anymore. It was inside it. Oh! Snow fell in violent spirals, whipping through the forest like shards of broken glass. The storm had grown fierce again, the night thick and screaming. Inside the cabin, chaos and smoke still hung in the air, the faint crackle of dying flames echoing against the wooden walls. Grant lay motionless on the floor where Ryan had left him, wrists bound, but the smirk never left his bloodied lips. The man's pale eyes flicked open slowly, and in a flash of practiced deceit, he whispered, "You'll never make it out alive." Before Ryan could react, Grant rolled, driving his shoulder hard into the table. It toppled, knocking over the lantern. Sparks flew. Ryan lunged forward, but Grant kicked him in the chest and bolted toward the door, snatching Mila in one swift motion as she screamed. "Mila!" Emma shouted, reaching out, but Grant had already crashed through the half-broken door. Snow gusted in like a living thing. Ryan staggered to his feet, wincing from his shoulder wound, his breath coming out in ragged clouds. Outside, the growl of an engine pierced the howling wind, a snowmobile roaring to life. Ryan stumbled to the window and saw Grant's black coat whipping in the gale, his arm gripping Mila tightly as he climbed onto the snowmobile. Its headlight cut through the dark like a single, predatory eye. "He's taking her," Emma cried, grabbing her coat. "I'll get her back," Ryan said, his voice low but steady. He loaded a fresh magazine, slipped it into his pistol, and turned to Shadow. "With me, boy." Shadow, though limping, rose instantly. Blood stained his fur, but his amber eyes burned with raw determination. He barked once, sharp, commanding, as if saying, "Let's finish this." Ryan pulled his snow goggles over his face, slung a rope over his shoulder, and burst through the door into the blinding white. The storm swallowed him whole. The world outside was a blur of gray and light, shapes shifting like ghosts. Ryan followed the fading track of the snowmobile, its red taillight blinking faintly in the distance. Shadow stayed close, paws pounding in rhythm with Ryan's heavy boots. The cold was brutal. It stung his lungs, clawed at his skin. But the sound of Mila's terrified sobs still echoed in his ears, pushing him forward. Behind them, Emma huddled in the cabin's doorway, holding Eli close beneath her coat, her face lit by the faint blue light of the emergency beacon. "Come on, Ryan," she whispered into the wind. "Don't let him win." She turned to the radio, twisting dials until static gave way to faint voices. The federal frequency she'd once used during veterinary rescues. "This is Dr. Emma Clark. Emergency coordinates near Silver Ridge Summit. Multiple hostiles, one child taken, Officer Ryan Cole in pursuit. Repeat, urgent." The signal hissed, then a clipped voice answered. "Copy that. We've got your signal. Hold position. Team en route." Relief trembled through her chest as she clutched the baby tighter. Out in the storm, the chase was a blur of flashing lights and roaring engines. Grant hunched low over the handlebars, his coat whipping like a banner of darkness. Mila cried out, struggling, her small hands beating against his arm. "Let me go," she screamed. "Be quiet," Grant snarled, his voice distorted by the storm. His face was pale, veins standing out against his temples. The fury in him was more than human. It was the panic of a man watching his empire crumble. Ryan's snowmobile, an old model left behind by rescue patrols, roared to life with a cough and a burst of light. He gunned the throttle, snow spraying up behind him. Shadow leaped onto the back platform, claws gripping the metal tight, wind flattening his fur. "Hang on, buddy," Ryan shouted through the blizzard. The storm howled around them, the world reduced to light, noise, and motion. He followed the red glow ahead, barely visible through the curtain of snow. Twice, Grant's taillight vanished completely, only to reappear like a devil's eye winking from the void. Ryan leaned into the curves, teeth clenched, muscles screaming against the cold. Grant looked back once, his lips curling in hatred. He fired a shot, a sharp crack swallowed by the storm. The bullet whizzed past Ryan's face, grazing the snowmobile's mirror. Shadow barked, crouching low, eyes locked ahead. "You're not getting away this time," Ryan growled. He pushed the engine harder. The machine bucked beneath him as it tore through the drifts, the wind slicing like knives against his exposed skin. The chase wound through the forest, past dead trees crusted with ice, through narrow gullies where the wind funneled like a scream. Then, without warning, Grant's vehicle jerked sideways. The snow beneath had turned slick, a buried patch of ice covering the edge of a ravine. The snowmobile fishtailed wildly, its engine roaring in protest. Grant fought for control, but the machine veered toward the cliff edge. Mila's small voice pierced the storm. "Help me!" Ryan's heart seized. He leaned hard to the right, steering around a fallen tree, closing the distance as Grant's snowmobile teetered dangerously near the precipice. "Hold on, sweetheart," he shouted. Then it happened. The snow beneath the front ski cracked with a thunderous snap. The snowmobile tilted. Grant screamed as the world fell away beneath him. He was thrown forward, the machine flipping nose first down the ravine. Mila flew from the seat, a blur of gray and red in the white air. Ryan didn't think, he reacted. "Shadow, go!" The German Shepherd launched off the back of the snowmobile like an arrow, fur whipping, muscles coiling midair. He hit the snow just in time to catch Mila's coat in his teeth, his powerful jaws clamping onto the fabric as her small body slid toward the edge. Snow crumbled beneath them. For a breathless second, both hung between life and death, the abyss yawning below. Then Shadow's hind legs found grip. He dug in, claws scraping ice, dragging her inch by inch back from the drop. Ryan threw himself off his snowmobile, grabbing the rope from his shoulder, lunging forward to help. He reached them just as the ground gave way beneath where Grant's snowmobile had vanished. The explosion below was blinding, orange fire billowing up from the ravine, sparks raining down like falling stars. He pulled Mila into his arms, shielding her from the shockwave. Her face was pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "Shadow. He saved me," she whispered. The dog stood beside them, panting heavily, blood from his reopened wound staining the snow, but his tail wagged faintly, exhausted, proud, alive. Ryan looked down the ravine. Grant's vehicle was nothing but twisted metal and flame, but in the center of the wreck, a faint movement caught his eye. Against all odds, Harold Grant was alive, crawling weakly through the snow, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Moments later, a sound broke through the blizzard, the rhythmic thump-thump of helicopter blades. A beam of white light swept across the forest. Over the radio on Ryan's shoulder, a voice crackled. "This is Special Agent Morris, FBI. We have your coordinates, Cole. Hold your position." Relief washed over him like warmth after frostbite. He pressed the radio close. "Copy that. Suspect down. Child safe." Within minutes, black-clad figures emerged through the snowstorm, agents with flashlights and rifles. They secured Grant, who still managed to sneer despite his injuries. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed as they cuffed him. Ryan didn't answer. He just turned away, kneeling beside Mila and Shadow. The little girl buried her face in his chest. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now." By the time they made it back to the clearing, Emma was there, her coat flapping in the storm, tears frozen on her cheeks. She rushed forward, wrapping Mila and Eli into her arms, her voice cracked with relief. Thank God. Thank God. Ryan stumbled beside her, exhausted. Shadow collapsed onto the snow beside them, his body trembling from cold and pain. Emma quickly unzipped her parka and spread it over the children and the dog, kneeling in the snow to block the wind with her body. Stay with me, just a little longer, she murmured, her blonde hair whipping around her face. The distant sound of sirens grew louder. The rescue convoy carving through the storm. Lights flashed red and blue against the endless white. When the paramedics arrived, they wrapped the children in Shadow in thermal blankets. Ryan sat silently on the snow, watching as the agents loaded the broken Harold Grant into a stretcher, his empire finally reduced to ash. Snow fell softly again, quieter now, gentler, as if the storm itself had finally exhaled. Ryan looked up into the night sky, the wind easing, the first hint of dawn brushing the horizon. Shadow's head rested on his leg, eyes half closed. Mila reached out from Emma's arms, her voice trembling. We made it, right? Ryan smiled faintly through cracked lips. Yeah, kid, we made it. The storm was over. The mountains of Silver Ridge had changed. Where once the wind screamed through icy pines, now it whispered gently through branches dressed in the soft green of early spring. The snow had melted into ribbons of silver running through the grass, and the air smelled faintly of pine sap and thawing earth. The storm was gone, not just from the land, but from their lives. 3 months had passed since that night. The memory of fire, snow, and gunfire still lingered in Ryan's mind like the echo of a distant thunderstorm, but each morning when he woke, the sound was softer. He stood now on the porch of the cabin, no longer a place of isolation, but a home, watching the valley below shimmer under sunlight. His police badge, newly reinstated, caught the light on the table beside him. The department had called it an extraordinary act of courage. The mayor had called it a miracle in the mountains. But for Ryan, it was simply a second chance, something he never thought he'd get again. Shadow trotted out from the doorway, his gait a little stiff but proud, the band of his new medal glinting against his fur. The hero of Silver Ridge. The 9-year-old German shepherd had healed well, the scar on his shoulder barely visible under his thick black and tan coat. Yet, even as an official hero, he acted no differently. Loyal, steady, watchful, always at Ryan's side. The sound of laughter broke through the quiet. On the field below, a 7-year-old girl in a yellow spring dress was chasing a ball through the wet grass. Mila's light brown hair, once matted with snow and fear, now bounced freely in the breeze. Her smile carried something pure, the kind of light only a child could hold after surviving darkness. Beside her, a baby boy, Eli, sat in the grass, chubby hands grabbing at wildflowers with curious delight. Emma sat near them, her long blonde hair tied loosely under a straw hat, her warm eyes following the children's every move. Emma had changed, too. The exhaustion that once lived in the lines of her face had softened. Since adopting Mila and Eli, she had found purpose again. The quiet woman who once spoke only to animals now laughed freely, teaching Mila to bake, to plant seeds, to name constellations. Her heart, cracked by loss, had become something even stronger. A shelter for 2 little souls who had lost everything. Ryan walked down the porch steps, the boards creaking under his boots. "You're getting faster," he called out as Mila hurled the ball with all her strength. Shadow bounded after it, his powerful legs cutting across the grass, tail slicing the air with joy. He caught it mid-bounce and returned, chest heaving, eyes bright. Mila clapped and giggled, hugging his neck as she said, "You're still the fastest in the world." Ryan smiled. "Careful. Say that too often and he'll start demanding steak for dinner again." Emma laughed softly. "He already does. Last week he barked at me when I served chicken." The sunlight caught in Ryan's eyes, and for a moment he let himself breathe in the simple perfection of the scene. the warmth of the day, the laughter of children, the loyal dog chasing joy across the field. For a man who once thought life had nothing left to give, this peace felt almost holy. Later that afternoon, they drove to the edge of the valley where the snow lingered longest, to a small hillside where wild crocuses had begun to bloom. A simple wooden cross stood there, half-shadowed by a pine. The name Sarah Clark was etched neatly into it. Beneath it, words that Ryan had carved himself. She trusted the storm, and the storm brought her children home. Emma knelt before the grave, setting a bundle of wildflowers against the wood. Her hand lingered on the carved letters, her eyes shining but calm. "You did it, Sarah," she whispered. "They're safe now. You can rest." Mila stepped forward, clutching Shadow's collar. "Mama said the storm was scary, but it couldn't take everything. She said the storm always ends." Ryan's voice was gentle. She was right. They stood there together, Emma, Mila, Ryan, and Shadow, the mountain wind moving softly around them. A hawk circled far above, silent, graceful, and for the first time in a long time, Ryan didn't feel the chill of the wind as loss. He felt it as life. As the sun dipped lower, they returned home. The golden light washed the valley in warmth, and the cabin glowed like something alive. Ryan stood for a moment watching Emma carry Eli inside, Mila chasing Shadow through the field one last time before dinner. The air hummed with crickets and the slow melting of snow, the sound of a world healing itself. Shadow trotted back to Ryan, the ball in his mouth. He dropped it at Ryan's feet and looked up, tail wagging. Ryan crouched, rubbing behind his ear. "You did good, old boy," he murmured. The dog's eyes reflected the sunset, steady, loyal, full of quiet knowing. He looked up at the horizon, where clouds parted to reveal streaks of gold breaking through the blue. The air felt lighter, almost divine. "Funny thing," Ryan said softly, almost to himself. "People always pray for miracles. They want thunder, light, something that shakes the world." He glanced at Shadow and smiled, his voice carrying into the fading wind. "But sometimes God doesn't send miracles. Sometimes he sends a dog." The evening fell around them like a warm blanket. Inside the cabin, laughter echoed again, the sound of family, of love reborn. Outside, the last of the snow melted under the gentle sun, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the storm that once tore their lives apart had finally drifted away for good.